Our headline is a few weeks old now, but it makes a good point. OG, Netflix hits its ceiling. Paid subscriber decline brings renewed focus on password sharing. Bad news is you and I can no longer share the same password for our Netflix. All of us, because it appears Netflix is onto our game, maybe onto everybody's game. Dan Gallagher writes, when it comes to streaming, 222 million seems to be the new sound barrier. Paid subscribers to Netflix would have just surpassed that number if not for the company's suspension of its service in Russia during the first quarter. Including that impact, Netflix actually saw quarterly paid subscribers fall for the first time in years. And with that fall, OG, kind of brings up a question. A lot of people have said, hey, you buy these stocks and you hold them for the long term, right? Netflix seems to have hit a speed bump where, I don't know, if you don't have Netflix yet, you're like that one person in America that might not have it. It seems like there's always got to be a reevaluation as Netflix is adding commercials to try to get a few more people in, which means even Netflix's numbers.
They're not adding commercials to get people in. They're adding commercials to find a new way to monetize.
Well, sure, but they're adding commercials to add subscribers that don't want to pay the subscription fee. So you can either pay the fee or they're going to find money and increase their subscriber count another way. But it feels like Netflix is doing the inevitable slowdown now that everybody has Netflix. They're also going after password sharing. Why? Because they need new sources of revenue. It feels like, OG, this idea of, hey, I just buy Microsoft and I hold it forever, buy Netflix and I hold it forever. With individual stocks, the reason I bring this to the table is I just think this is another indicator that you probably always got to be weeding that garden if you're buying individual stocks, like reevaluating.
Well, and obviously now is probably not the day to decide that Netflix doesn't belong there. The day to decide that Netflix didn't belong there was, a few weeks ago before their earnings announcement. But this is why it's so difficult to try to pick long-term winners. Now, depending on when you bought Netflix, you still might be up 500,000% or whatever. I mean, Netflix has been around for 20 years probably. So, I mean, you could have bought it when they were hawking DVDs, mailing them to you. You'll have less money than you did today, the other day, but still pretty good. So that's important to recognize too. But when you look at like the big outsized returns of the stock market over the last, let's say 5 or 10 years or so, it's been denominated in large U.S. tech companies, the proverbial fangs of the world, right? It's Facebook and Apple and Netflix and Google, and that cycle may be changing a little bit, or if it's going to be tech stocks, it might not be those tech stocks, which makes it that much more difficult to buy individual positions and keep them for a long time. Like you said, you want to keep them forever, but
harder to do that with an individual stock. Because if you think about Netflix, I mean, we're old enough to remember Netflix pivoting from sending you DVDs in the mail to streaming.
Yeah.
And then going to streaming.
I think a lot of people are old enough to.
And then going from streaming to a very big focus on original content, right? I mean, you go to Netflix for stuff that Netflix makes now versus before you go to, watch Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom.
Yeah, actually, now you have to, because so many of the owners of the rights to the big movies, they have their own streaming platforms, and so Netflix can't get access to those things, and they've got to create their own stuff. I was just thinking about, when you were going through the acronym of FANG, OG, I thought the A was Amazon. I always did.
There's 2 A's, actually, but
there's 2 A's in FANG?
It's FANG.
FANG.
Like Aaron.
All right, Aaron. In commerce, in Amazon's world, there's a lot of ways to diversify your revenue streams, and it seems like in entertainment that there's a little less.
So how with your individual stocks, OG, do you decide when to sell? Like, as an example, you said the day to sell would have been just before the earnings report a few weeks ago, right? Where they announced all this disappointing stuff. Do you have a series of filters? Do you have a time frame that you work from? Like when you're buying individual stocks, how do you decide this is my exit?
I don't have any idea because I mean, when you look at Netflix as an example, you have to have so much more information before you say, well, this is a good or bad purchase or sale. I mean, hindsight's always 2020. So it looked like a really good time to sell it a couple weeks ago, but maybe today is the day you have to sell it. Maybe today is the best day that there's going to be, right? I mean, I don't have really any idea as it relates to individual stock buying and selling, because when you look at a stock price, it's really about the long-term prospects of future earnings. And that's reflected in today's price. The other thing that you have to consider is if you're owning Netflix, when did you purchase it? You know, if you bought it at $1 and today it's, I don't know, whatever it is, 300 something or whatever the number, you know, it's pretty good. It's not as good as it was a few weeks ago, but it's pretty good. Then again, today might be the best day that it's ever going to have from here on out. It might be as high as it's ever going to be. And, you know, I think that when you go into individual stock ownership, you have to recognize where you've had an excess return beyond what you would normally get. And anything above that excess return, I think you have to really seriously consider taking off the table. Because if you're buying individual stocks, you're doing so because you think that you can do better than just dumping it in an ETF. So if you're going to have some sandbox money, or if you're going to go buy an individual stock, or if you're going to be a stock trader, you better be doing 10% a year. And if you all of a sudden your stock does 15% in a week, I think you have to recognize that, normally stocks go up 10% a year. I just made 15% in a week. What does that mean? You know, that means that you won, and it's time to, you know, cash in that excess, you know, that excess return. That's how I've always thought about it anyway. And on the downside, you're even more perplexed because, you know, again, Netflix announced, hey, we lost 25% of our subscribers. And oh, by the way, we think we're going to lose 2 million more next year or next quarter. Holy crap.
Incoming. Houston.
Yeah, so it sounds like, just like in your bigger picture financial life, start with the end in mind. If you're buying an individual stock, you better have a goal. And then as soon as you hit that goal or exceed it, think about have an exit strategy. Think about getting out. Did I summarize that at all accurately?
I think so. I'm just looking at, because I didn't actually look at Netflix stocks. I was just kind of aware of it. So this is even worse.
And obviously
we're
recording this
worse than I thought.
A little bit behind. So Netflix may have done even more from the time that we record this to the day that we're.
Well, here
could be out of business right now.
Yeah, here's what I'm seeing. They used to be 700. It's down 65% in 6 months. It was 700 a share, and now it's 220. So
here's the real question. By the time this airs, does Netflix have a new name called Disney Plus Plus?
What's the over under on Netflix between the day that we record it and the day that you hear it? 226.19. That's what it shows right now. But here's another great example. So you zoom out, right? So I just said, hey, in the last 6 months, Netflix is down 65%. Oh, it takes our breath away, right? In the last 12 months, it's down 55%. In the last 5 years, it's up 60%.
Yeah, you're still winning big.
You know, I mean, if you bought it 5 years ago, yeah. If you bought it when it started, you're up 18,000%. You know,
but if you're just buying the FANGs, OG, because that's that was such a term, you got your butt kicked.
Yeah, depending. Yep. And then you see this reflected
just on that stock specifically. I mean,
yeah, and if you see this reflected in the index, just because a large percentage of the index is controlled by a few companies. So as these companies go, so does the index.
Speaking of casting a wider net, I want to talk about the stock market in general because another Wall Street Journal piece by Spencer Jacob, who was on the show earlier this year. Spencer writes that companies buying back their stock, OG, are at an all-time high. Buybacks for the S&P 500 are set to top $1 trillion, according to Goldman Sachs. And companies buying back their own stock, and Spencer's wondering if that is showing us that maybe the stock market, not the stock market, but people on Wall Street are trying to eke out a little more return. Why do companies buy their stock back?
When organizations have profit, there's a few things that they can do with it. They can pay the shareholders the profit. So, if Stacking Benjamins makes money this year, Joe, we get to share some profit.
Capital F.
Yeah, capital I, capital F.
It's a dream. Everybody's got a dream.
Yeah.
We all have
A
dreams.
man can dream. So,
you can dream too, Joe.
So, we own Stacking Benjamin. So if it makes a profit, then as the shareholders, the owners, we can share in that profit. We can take the cash. We can also take that cash and say, we should hire new people, or we should add better technology, or Joe should get a better camera. So his video is a little, oh no, that's as clear as it's going to get. Never mind.
That's as good as he looks.
We should take it and blow it on a 40-city tour.
Yeah. We didn't use the profit for that. That was more of a, so we can do, we can reinvest the proceeds, or if we're a public company, I guess if you're a private company, you can do this too, but you can buy back your own stock. So you look at the stock market. So the fine folks at Netflix are looking today and going, 226. Hey, maybe that's a good price. Maybe they think that's a good price for that stock. And
they think they're undervalued.
Yeah, they think it should be 700. And so they can buy back their stock, which reduces the number of shares outstanding, which has an effect of raising the price. So with companies having so much excess cash lying around, and this is happening to individuals as well, this is why we talked about this a couple of weeks ago, the impact to shareholders is that as a shareholder of a company that's super profitable, you don't want them to have lots of cash. You say, well, you made $1 billion and you added 900 million to your checkbook. Like, I'll take some, I'm a shareholder, give it to me. And the executive team has to decide what's the best use for that. And sometimes that's a dividend, that's a special dividend. Sometimes it's, buying a new factory or building a new one. And then sometimes it's buying back their own stock. So it gets a lot of negative press, share buybacks, because people think like it's not reinvesting in the business good enough. It's not, if you're not.
It truly is reinvesting in the business. You're kind of reloading your weapons so that when the market goes back up, you can reissue those shares and hopefully bring in even more cash to fund future operations, right?
Yeah, I guess there's one way to look at it. I was thinking about it like if you're not a shareholder or somehow involved in the organization, and you see a company that made $1 billion and they decided to consume it internally, basically, you're going, well, why did you charge me so much for toilet paper then? Like, why didn't you just, so people get a little bit upset about that. But
we're back to toilet paper.
I feel like toilet paper is going to come up a lot. I don't want to talk about tomorrow's show. However, I feel like we got a theme to the new 8 weeks.
You're going to hear that again, ladies and gentlemen.
We're starting
forecasting.
Yeah.
So anyway, so that's what the shareholder buybacks are.
Well, and obviously you take what's going on at Netflix, you take shareholder buybacks, those two things. Let's throw in a third, because individually I don't know that these mean something, but I'm wondering if this third thing means that together these are all more meaningful. Stock splits. Have you seen what's going on with stock splits? There's this huge resurgence in the stock split market, OG, and Laura Foreman writes that stock splits are financially meaningless, but the rush of them could be meaningful. There's this huge number of companies that are splitting their stock. So as the stock market goes down, they're looking at individual shareholders. And Laura kind of tries to make the point here that, hey, we're splitting our shares because we need individual investors to think of this as a sale and buy more.
I think there's a little psychological impact there on the stock splitting, but it's also because of the fact that, well, up until recently, I mean, very recently, within the last maybe 6 or 8 months, buying fractional ownership of shares was very difficult and very costly. So, if you wanted to buy a share of Amazon, you had to fork over $3,000, and some change. So that does preclude some investors from being able to own that part of the market, which is another plus, by the way, for ETFs. But if from a math standpoint, shareholder splits, or share splits, I should say, shareholder splits would be, completely messy, because that would be disgusting. You'd see like half a shareholder over here, half a shareholder over
limbs
here.
everywhere.
It'd just
horrible.
Be like Fargo.
Blood in the streets.
Like a Guy Ritchie movie on Wall Street.
Buddy and the wood chipper then, eh? Anyways,
Is that your friend over there in the stock splitter?
the stock splitter. That's the shareholder splitter.
Joe Salci, ladies and
The
gentlemen.
shareholder splitter. The stock splitter is an okay thing. The shareholder splitter is
The
bad.
shareholder splitter.
You know, that's what happens when you get a divorce. You have a shareholder splitter. Anyways, so yeah, stock splits are functionally meaningless. I mean, it's completely meaningless. If you have 10 shares of a stock at, beware of doing math
Sure.
on in real time.
shows.
But, yeah, but
Use 100.
wait, it's got to be.
Here's a tip.
If the stock is trading at $7.11 and you have 19 shares and it splits 10 to 1, how many do you have? Or 7.3 to 1, how many do you have? Like, oh crap. But it's the same value, right? You have 10 times as many shares for 10 times less the price. It's the same dollar amount. But it does incentivize people. If you all of a sudden you look at Netflix is doing like a stock split themselves, just not really by splitting their stock. Some people are looking at Netflix at $200 going, hey, it's on sale. Amazon is $30 a share. People go, oh my gosh, I can get a whole bunch of it. I remember when it was $30 a share before and it went to 3,000. Maybe I'll do it again. So it does have a psyche effect more than anything.
I like the thing you just brought up, I don't know, 20 minutes ago. You've been talking for a long time. I can't keep it straight. But the ability now to buy fractional shares kind of makes splitting irrelevant.
Yeah.
I hadn't really thought of it that way. So that's because
Well,
that's the only reason I'd heard. The only reason that companies really split is to create that more retail appeal to the lower end investment community.
But does the average person know that they can buy it just
Not yet.
half a share or
Yeah.
a quarter share?
Not
I don't
yet,
think
but
the
it's
average
coming.
person
I mean,
knows.
it's been around for a while, but now more companies are getting into it. Stockpile's been doing it for what, 10 years?
But
Yeah,
you
but
bring up the
stockpile
point,
charges
which is
freaking
why
dollar a transaction, which is just insane. Talk about cost structure. Like, oh no, it's only 99
right?
cents.
But because there was no competition in the market, but now there's starting to be competition, and that'll come down. Go ahead, Joe.
There's a reason I bring all three of these up, and I'm glad you brought this up, Doug, because we start off with Netflix and maybe trying to get the ship rewrited because of the fact that they are apparently running out of people subscribing to Netflix, so they need
to do a shareholder split.
Well, look at the second piece. The second piece
Double
that
their
we talked about.
available people.
The second piece,
Nope.
stock.
Nothing? Doug
Keep
got
going,
it.
Joe. Ignore that.
The second piece, stock buybacks. And so you've got companies looking at the stock market and using it as buybacks. What does that signal? On top of stock splits happening. I mean, there's the thing the average person thinks you're OG, which is all of these things. Does this mean that people in the know on Wall Street think the stock market is way high and is
shareholder
still gonna come down
buybacks
a bunch?
or stock buybacks are actually quite bullish sentiment. That means that the executive team thinks, hey, we've got really good stuff going on here, and you guys are still pricing us based on yesterday's news. So we'll take it. If nobody else wants it, we'll take it at this price. We think that's really attractive. The stock splits, it doesn't really have a material impact, but it can incentivize other investors who might want to buy, a share of Amazon or whatever. Instead of it being $3,000, it's $300. It might be a little bit more feasible. So there's a little bit of that, but I think out of all of those things, the most interesting news is the buybacks.
Interesting stuff. We're going to link to all those stories on our newsletter, the 201, where we do deeper dives into all of these. Brooke Miller on our team always finds ways to take the discussions we have here, make them even more interesting, and go into depth on all these topics. stackingbenjamins.com/201 for you to sign up.